She picked up on the third ring, and there was a pause before she spoke. Not the kind of pause where someone is surprised to hear from you, the kind where they're deciding something. "We already did the opening," my daughter-in-law said. "Last Friday. Just a small thing, just for close friends." I was standing in my kitchen in Guelph, still holding the flyer my son had mailed me 3 weeks earlier. Grand opening, Ridgewood Brewing Co. Save the date. I had the date saved. I had driven past the building on my last visit just to picture it. I had already bought a bottle of scotch to bring as a gift. "Oh," I said. That was all I could manage. Just, "Oh." She said something after that, something about how it came together fast, how they didn't want to make a big deal of it, how they'd do a proper celebration soon and I'd be included. I made the right sounds. I said, "Of course, that's fine. Congratulations." Then I hung up and stood there in my kitchen for a long time with the flyer still in my hand. My son's name is Joel. He's 38 years old. For most of his adult life, he's been the kind of person other people describe as having potential. Bright kid, everyone always said. Knows how to work a room. I believed it. I'm his father. Of course I believed it. His wife, I'll call her his wife, though she's never made me feel like family, is named Petra. She came into Joel's life about 6 years ago, and within 8 months they were living together in a rented house in Hamilton. She has strong opinions and a way of making you feel slightly wrong about everything. I noticed it early, but told myself I was being protective. Fathers do that. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. The brewery idea came from Joel. He'd been home brewing for years, had won a few local competitions, and he genuinely had a talent for it. I'll never say he didn't. The idea wasn't the problem. What happened around the idea, that was the problem. He called me in the spring of 2020. The world was in the middle of collapsing, which in retrospect I should have taken as a sign. He said he and Petra had found a location in the East End of Hamilton, an old machine shop with good bones. They had a vision. They had a plan. What they didn't have was enough capital to get the licensing, the equipment, and the renovation done before their option on the space ran out. I was 61 at the time. I had retired early from 32 years in telecommunications, not rich, but careful. I had savings I'd protected through 2 recessions. I had my house in Guelph, paid off. I was not a wealthy man, but I was a stable one. I said yes. Not immediately, but within 2 weeks. I drove to Hamilton and walked through the space with them. I looked at Joel's face when he talked about it, and I thought, this is the thing that will make him. This is what he needs to become, who he's supposed to be. I transferred $40,000 to their business account in June of 2020. Joel cried when I told him. He actually cried. He hugged me in the parking lot of that old machine shop and said, "Dad, I won't forget this." Those were his exact words. I won't forget this. What followed was 2 years of slow construction, delayed permits, supply problems, and, somewhere in the middle of all of it, a shift in the way Joel spoke to me. It was gradual enough that I couldn't point to a single moment, but I started noticing that he'd forget to return calls. That when I visited, Petra would find reasons to leave the room or the house. That questions I asked about the business were answered briefly, with a kind of impatience, like I was an investor who'd already been thanked and no longer needed to be consulted. In the fall of 2021, there was a problem with the HVAC system, a significant one. Joel called me on a Tuesday night. He explained it quickly, said the contractor had underquoted, said the estimate to fix it properly was $18,000. He said he didn't want to go to the bank again because they were already stretched. He said he was sorry to ask. I said I'd help. I transferred $15,000 and told him to cover the rest however he could. He said thank you. He sent a text the next morning, "Means everything, Dad." That was the last time he initiated contact for almost 3 months. Somewhere in that period, he and Petra got married. I found out the way I found out about the brewery opening after the fact from a second-hand mention. Joel called me on a Sunday afternoon, and about 20 minutes into the conversation he said, casually, "Oh, and Petra and I made it official last month. Just a courthouse thing, nothing big. I said, congratulations. I asked why he hadn't told me. He said they wanted to keep it simple. He said they'd do a proper celebration eventually. I sat with that for weeks. The explanation was possible, I told myself. Some people do that. Some couples want something quiet. But I had helped pay for the restaurant where they'd held their engagement party 2 years earlier. I'd been there for that. I gave a toast. And now I hadn't been told about the wedding until a month after it happened. I didn't say anything. I don't know now if that was wisdom or weakness. Probably both. By the time the brewery actually opened, the real opening, the one I'd seen announced on social media while I was eating breakfast on a Thursday morning, I'd given Joel a total of $58,000 over 3 years. I want to be accurate about that number. Not $46,000, not $60,000. $58,000 in 4 separate transfers, each one preceded by a phone call where my son sounded like himself again, like the boy I raised, like someone who needed me. The Friday after I found out about the opening, I drove to Hamilton. I didn't call ahead. I parked on the street outside Ridgewood Brewing Co., and I looked at it. It was good. It was genuinely good. The signage was clean, the windows had been done well, there were plants in the entryway that gave it a warmth. Joel knew what he was doing. He'd built something real. I didn't go in. I sat in my car for about 20 minutes, then I drove home. I told myself I needed time to think. What I was really doing was trying to decide whether I was going to be the kind of man who asks for an explanation, or the kind who absorbs the hurt quietly and moves on. I'd been the second kind my whole life. My ex-wife, Joel's mother, used to say I swallowed everything. She wasn't wrong. She was gone by the time Joel was 12, and I had raised him mostly alone, and I had swallowed a great deal. I called Joel the following Wednesday. I told him I'd heard about the opening, that I was glad it had gone well, that I hoped he was proud. He said thanks. Yeah, it was a good night. I asked if he'd thought about having a family dinner at the brewery at some point to celebrate properly. He said sure, they'd figure something out. They never figured something out. 3 months passed. In that time I called Joel 4 times. He answered twice and texted back once. Petra answered once by accident, I think, because she said she'd have him call me back, and he didn't. I stopped by the brewery on a Saturday afternoon in March, thinking I'd just go in as a customer. The person behind the bar didn't know who I was. Joel was in the back and came out when she went to get him. He was pleasant. He introduced me to a staff member as my dad. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. Petra appeared at the kitchen doorway once, saw me, and went back in. On the drive home, I cried. I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm 64 years old, and I cried on the 403 because my son looked at me like I was a customer. I had been thinking for a while about the transfers, not about taking the money back. That was never in my mind. But I had been moving my retirement savings around in response to some of those transfers, and my financial advisor in Guelph, a steady woman named Roberta, who'd been managing my RRSP for years, had started asking careful questions about my long-term security. She wasn't alarmed, but she was watchful. I was 64, and I had given away a significant portion of what I'd accumulated. I needed to stop. I didn't say anything to Joel. I just stopped. When he texted me in June, the first text he'd sent in 2 months, asking if I could help cover some equipment costs, I said I was sorry, I couldn't do it right now. I said my own finances needed attention. I said I loved him. He called the next morning. He was not the version of himself I liked. He said I'd committed to supporting the brewery. I said I'd chosen to help, which was different from committing. He said I was pulling the rug out when they needed stability. I said I'd already given what I could and that it hadn't been enough for either of us. He said that wasn't fair. I said I agreed. Then I said goodbye and hung up. Petra called an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message I've listened to more times than I should have. Her voice was controlled and precise in the way that very angry people sometimes sound very calm. She said that I had made promises to their business, that I had created a financial dependency and then abandoned it, that they had made decisions, staffing, equipment, lease extensions, based on an expectation I had established. She said the word obligation twice. I sat with that voicemail for 3 days. I played it for Roberta, who has known me for 11 years and who said, with characteristic understatement, "That's a concerning message." The letter from the law firm arrived 6 weeks later. It was addressed to me at my home in Guelph. The firm was based in Burlington. The letter outlined a claim that I had, through a pattern of financial transfers over a defined period, established an implied contractual obligation to the business, and that my cessation of those transfers had caused demonstrable harm. They were seeking $32,000 in damages. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. Then I made a cup of tea because I didn't know what else to do. Then I called my brother in Sudbury, who's a retired high school teacher and not a lawyer, but who is the most sensible person I know. He said, "Don't say anything to anyone until you've talked to a lawyer." I said I knew that. He said, "Say it out loud so I know you know it." I said it out loud. My lawyer's name is Colin, and he works out of a small firm in Guelph that handles mostly estate and family law. He's thorough and unhurried, and he doesn't pretend things are simpler than they are. When I brought him the letter and the records of every transfer I'd made, amounts, dates, accompanying texts, and emails, he looked at everything carefully and then looked at me. "Were any of these formalized?" he asked. "Loan agreements, promissory notes, anything in writing that called these payments a loan or established any expectation of return?" I said no. "Did you ever represent yourself in writing or otherwise as a long-term financial partner of the business?" I said no. I said I was his father. I said fathers help their children. Colin nodded. He said the claim would be difficult to sustain. He said gifts between family members, especially undocumented ones, were not typically interpreted as binding financial agreements under Ontario law. He said the pattern of transfers might be used to argue implied expectation, but that the bar was high. He said we'd respond to the letter and likely not hear much more. He was mostly right, we responded. There was a back and forth between the lawyers, 2 exchanges, professional in tone, going nowhere productive. Then, 5 months after the original letter, I received a notice that the matter was proceeding to small claims court. I want to be honest about what that period was like. I'm a private person. I spent 32 years in a corporate environment where you learned to manage your face, to not let things show. But this was my son. This was the boy I had taken to Leafs games when he was 9, because it was the only thing that made winter feel like something worth living through. This was the person I had driven to emergency at 2 in the morning when he was 23 and had a kidney stone and was scared out of his mind. This was Joel, and Joel was suing me. I lost about 15 pounds in those months. I didn't sleep well. I had a doctor's appointment in November where my blood pressure was high enough that my doctor, a calm and direct man named Dr. Ferreira, asked me flat out if I was under unusual stress. I told him everything. He didn't say much. He adjusted my medication and told me to walk every day, which I did. The hearing was in February, in a small room in Hamilton that smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. The deputy judge was a precise woman who kept time carefully and had a habit of writing things down before anyone finished speaking. I was represented by Colin. Joel and Petra had a younger lawyer who made his argument efficiently and without flourish. Their case was essentially this: that my pattern of transfers had created a reasonable expectation of ongoing support, and that the business had expanded in direct response to that expectation, and that my withdrawal had caused quantifiable harm. Colin's response was essentially this: that gifts between a parent and an adult child carry no legal obligation, that I had never signed any agreement, made any formal commitment, or represented myself as anything other than a father choosing to help, and that the decision to expand the business based on voluntary family contributions was a business decision, not a contractual one, made by the respondents at their own risk. I was allowed to speak. I had not planned to say very much. But when the deputy judge asked if I had anything to add, I found I did. I said I had given my son $58,000 over 3 years because I loved him and believed in what he was building. I said none of that money had come with conditions or expectations of repayment. I said I had not been told about my son's wedding until a month after it happened. I said I had not been invited to the opening of the business I had helped fund. I said I had continued to call and visit and try to maintain a relationship with someone who had progressively made me feel unwelcome. And I said that when I finally stopped providing money because I needed to protect my own retirement, I had been sued. The deputy judge wrote something down. She did not look up for a moment. The ruling came in the mail 11 days later. The claim was dismissed. Costs were awarded to me, not a significant amount, but enough to cover Colin's fees and make the point clearly. Joel has not contacted me since the hearing. That was 14 months ago. I think about him every day. That's the part people don't always understand when they hear a story like this. They think the ending is clean. You win, you move on. But he's still my son. He'll always be my son. There isn't a version of this where it stops being true. My brother came down from Sudbury in March, and we drove to Niagara-on-the-Lake for a few days, ate well, walked along the water, talked about our father who died in 1997 and who was a difficult man but who never once made us feel like obligations to be managed. I thought about that a lot on those walks, what it means to be a father, whether I did it right, whether any of this would have gone differently if I'd been someone other than who I am. I don't have an answer to that. What I have is my house in Guelph, which I've started fixing up properly for the first time since my wife left. I painted the living room in October. I built raised garden beds in the backyard this spring. I started going to a woodworking class on Tuesday evenings at the community center, something I'd told myself for 20 years I'd get around to eventually. My financial advisor Roberta tells me I'm in better shape than I feared, that the early retirement is sustainable if I'm careful, which I have always been. Some nights I drive past the brewery, not often, just sometimes. I drive past and I look at the lights on inside, and I think about Joel behind the bar or in the back somewhere, doing what he set out to do, building what he said he wanted to build. I helped him build it. I know that. Whatever he believes now, whatever Petra has convinced him of, that part is not something that can be revised. I drove my son to Little League games in a truck that barely started in the winter. I sat in emergency at 2 in the morning when he was scared. I wired money I'd spent 32 years saving because he cried in a parking lot and said he wouldn't forget. I don't regret the money. I regret that it was the most important thing about me to them. But I'm still here, and for the first time in a long time, my blood pressure is normal.